So, I was one of those kids who went to camp every summer, but it wasn't one of those fancy camps with cabins and canoes. No, I was being raised by a single mom who's actually here tonight. Ow! And my camp, yeah, give her a round of applause. So my camp was Uncle Pat's house in Southern California. And Uncle Pat is the oldest sibling of my mom's family. He is the leader and the mobilizer. When my parents divorced, my mom, again, was single, and so she needed her brother's help. So my Uncle Pat became a second father to me. He and my Aunt Marcy took in all the neighborhood kids, bought us all bikes, and all summer we would just bike around the neighborhood and do all these random projects Uncle Pat assigned us. He was also a gifted jazz musician and a total troublemaker.
When Nicole and I first started chatting about her Uncle Pat, she described him as this warm, welcoming, but get your ass in here type. If one of the kids got in trouble, he would give them a choice. You're either going to get spanked or I'm going to lecture you.
Seriously. His lectures would be 2 to 3 hours long, and we would have to sit and listen. Sometimes it would get so long, we would just ask for the spanking to get it over with. And Uncle Pat's superpower was talking.
And his life was this sweeping epic that stretched from the grape fields of Delano to the anti-war protests that shook up the nation. Pat was in the room when Larry Itliong and Cesar Chavez merged their unions, when Mexican farm workers joined Filipino farm workers on the picket line.
In fact, there's this joke in my family that Uncle Pat is the Filipino Forrest Gump. Well, because he saw and experienced all of Phil-Am history. So when I was in my 30s, I decided it was finally time to record his stories. And every time I'd visit him in LA, I would just bust out my video camera.
Light bothering you?
No, it's okay.
Okay. Yeah, it looks good. You look good, Uncle Pat.
We'd be sitting in his garage, most of the time smoking weed, and I just press record.
I'm going to be around too long.
So why do you say that? We're all Uncle Pat. Don't be selfish.
Yeah, right.
We're all gonna be gone.
Yes.
I recorded about 15 hours of footage, and my Uncle Pat was just there flexing his superpower, storytelling.
I'm starting to jump out of my skin. I'm looking at the sky, and all of a sudden, I'm fearing for my life for some reason.
Uncle Pat told so many stories, but the story we want to tell you today is one you probably don't know, about Patrick J. Salaver, the civil rights hero. He transformed higher education in the 1960s, organizing right here in San Francisco.
If you ask any Mexican American, who is Cesar Chavez?
You ask any African American person, who is Malcolm X, who is MLK?
But if you ask any Filipino, but everyone knows who those people are. Any American knows who they are.
But if you ask a Filipino American or Asian American, who is Patrick Salaver?
They probably have no clue. But to me, he was just as important. He sacrificed his own freedom for the sake of equality.
So in 1967, Pat was a student at San Francisco State University, then called San Francisco State College.
My alma mater.
And that summer, he got wrapped in the political moment.
What is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years.
The civil rights movement was dovetailing with the anti-Vietnam War movement. And the Black Panther Party had just been established across the bay in Oakland.
And here, whether you know it or not, is where you start dealing with the Black Revolution.
And at San Francisco State, the Black Student Union was at war with the administration, fighting for more Black students to be admitted to the school. Why? Because a disproportionate number of Black and brown young men were being drafted into the Vietnam War, and the BSU knew that college enrollment could save your life. The BSU also wanted the school to hire more Black professors and to establish a Black Studies department. Now Pat, Nicole's uncle, he wanted to join the BSU to support their cause. As a first-gen student from a working-class family, he understood their demands. But instead, the BSU leaders encouraged him to start his own organization for Filipino Americans. And what Pat created was PACE, which stood for the Philippine American Collegiate Endeavor. And he began to go around campus recruiting members.
But all these Filipino students, they were super confused by what he was trying to do because there had never really been a political organization for Filipinos before at any college, anywhere in the nation. And so here was my Uncle Pat trying to start one on the grassy lawns of SF State, just a few miles from where we are today.
It was difficult because, I would have to organize and canvass people to understand what the organization was all about. And that wasn't so easy because I had to.
But my Uncle Pat was relentless. He would just walk up to students and ask if they were Filipino. Then tell them, not invite them, tell them, great, you're a member of PACE now. You're coming to the first meeting.
Granted, many of them said, no, I'm not interested. Some of them, when they saw me coming, they would run the other way.
And PACE still exists at SF State today as a Philippine X American Collegiate Endeavor, and some of their members are actually here in the audience tonight. Let's give them applause. And though PACE recognizes a few co-founders, none of them argue that my Uncle Pat was actually the lead founder, the mobilizer. And he led PACE students to fight for Filipinos all over the Bay Area.
Through Pat's leadership, PACE participated in the anti-eviction protests at the International Hotel.
Fight hard with us so that we can maintain the hotel from being demolished.
A 3-story building in Manila town that was home to elderly and low-income Filipinos, many of whom were from the Manong generation, who immigrated in the 20s and 30s.
Uncle Pat and PACE also helped Filipino kids in Bernal Heights District apply for scholarships and fill out college applications. Just like BSU, PACE knew that getting their peers into college would possibly save their lives from the draft. And Pat wanted PACE to be in solidarity with all the other student groups at State, pushing for school to admit more BIPOC students and teach a curriculum that served all people, not just a white, Eurocentric view of history and the world.
Pat's leadership of Filipino students was like a stone in a pond, sending out waves and preparing the Bay Area for the battle to come. 1968 was the breaking point. That was the year Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, and the Vietnam War showed no signs of slowing down. And SF State wasn't changing fast enough. So the Black Student Union invited all the other student groups to form a coalition. Their roster included the Latin American Students Organization, El Renacimiento, the Intercollegiate Chinese for Social Action, and of course, PACE. Together, these students called themselves the Third World Liberation Front.
Developed by the Third World faculty, by Third World students, and Third World community people. We have had a strike.
The idea behind the name Third World was to call attention to the Third World struggles happening in colonial and post-colonial countries. And because of Pat, Filipino students like Nestor Aquino were organized and ready to fight.
Not very many of you know the difference. For your information, Philippine refers to the country and Filipino refers to the people. This is exactly what we want. In this campus is a study of Filipino culture and history.
Instructors on campus got on board too. Some of them taught a third world curriculum, which connected oppression abroad to oppression in the United States. And one of those instructors was a black grad student named George Murray, who was also the Black Panthers' Minister of Education.
We were attacked because we're black people striving to politically educate the masses of the people here in America to create a new system of government that will...
That September at a press conference, George Murray shared the Black Panthers' position on the war.
Our statement was that the war in Vietnam is racist. It is a war that crackers like Johnson are using black soldiers and poor white soldiers and Mexican soldiers as dupes and fools to fight against people of color in Vietnam.
Murray kept speaking out with even stronger language, and the college suspended him.
We're going into the buildings as a mass. We're going to ask people to come out of classes.
In response, hundreds of students began to gather, demanding Murray be reinstated and the curriculum be changed. The strike began on November 6th, 1968.
This school's on strike until he meets with us, until he meets social media.
And Pat and Pace were there, refusing to go back to class. And joining the rest of the Third World Liberation Front in what would become the longest student strike in U.S. history.
Over the next few days, weeks, and months, the protest grew. Police, or the tactical squad, were in full riot gear, some on horseback, some spraying mace, swinging batons at students and instructors. In response, even more students and instructors quit class and joined the strike, unafraid to face the police.
Get back, pig! Get back, pig! Get back, pig!
And the strike leaders agreed the next time the police tried to arrest a protester, they would all intervene. This is a story my uncle told me in his own words.
The tactical squad comes and arrests somebody, okay, and it takes them up. How come nobody's doing it? How come no one's trying to stop this arrest, you know?
And so my uncle, he threw something towards the police line, but it hit a cop on his helmet.
And you could hear that whack through the entire campus. So I turned around to run, and everybody was gone. There was nobody to hide behind.
And my uncle was the only one there. Then all of these cops were descending on him with their batons out.
These cops, you know, were gonna have a beating party.
Then all of a sudden, a white nursing student jumped on his body in solidarity and protection.
And that stopped the tactical squad, you know, from hitting me.
Pat and students like him put their very physical safety on the line and their education on hold to fight for a better future for all of us.
Lasting 5 months, the Third World Liberation Front is still the longest strike in U.S. history, and it only ended when the BSU and the Third World Liberation Front leaders reached a deal with the administration, when the school agreed to admit more non-white college applicants in the fall and established the nation's first ever College of Ethnic Studies.
Number one, that funds be allocated to the implementation of the third world policy.
The students.
Students of Columbia University will not be students in a university that exploits black people.
The student strike was so momentous, it inspired protests at other schools like UC Berkeley and Columbia University. This movement changed higher education forever, and it paved the way for the kind of student protesting and coalition building we see today. Because of Pat and student leaders like him, there are now hundreds of ethnic studies programs across the United States. Curricula that tell a truer story of the history of this country and how communities of color have always been agents of change.
Unfortunately, my Uncle Pat was punished for being so outspoken, and after the strikes ended, he resisted the draft, which, many people did, and only 0.5% were ever convicted. But my uncle was in that 0.5%, and because of his political activism, he was targeted by the FBI's counterintelligence program, and he was put in federal prison for 2 years. In prison, he wrote a letter, which was published by Rolling Stone magazine. Emily actually recorded my other uncle, Tim Salaver, reading it for this story.
My crime was not a violent act. It had no victims, other than myself, perhaps. My crime was confronting a brutal system that denied me and others around the world the right of self-determination. This is the 10th year of our participation in the war in Southeast Asia, and it has been clear for some time to many that it was wrong. This being an election year, many politicians will at least say it was wrong, yet I suspect that many of us will still be in jail this Christmas. Set us free.
My Uncle Pat was eventually set free, but he wasn't the same after prison. While many of the fellow organizers had illustrious career paths, like judges or tenured professors, my uncle never graduated from college. And for as long as I knew him, he buried that part of his past, a shame. Until, in 1999, I went to SF State, and I realized what had happened and how much he sacrificed because I took a Filipino-American history class taught by Professor Dan Gonzalez. That's when I fully grasped everything. And that's why I started interviewing him, piecing together the fragments, why I told Emily the story on Inheriting Podcast, and why I feel it's important to share with all of you today. In 2003, I was preparing to graduate SF State, and I fought to get my Uncle Pat an honorary degree. So he stood in front of 300 Filipino Americans who were all about to graduate because of him. Because of his sacrifice. I don't think he's ever seen anything like that. And it's my dream to make his life and his sacrifice into a movie. October is actually Filipino American History Month. Yes. And this year's theme is struggle, resistance, solidarity, and resiliency. And now more than ever, I want everyone, not just Filipino Americans, not just Asian Americans, but all Americans to know my uncle's name, Patrick Salaver.
Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial or ethnic group in the United States and the fastest growing group of eligible voters. That means we are amassing more and more political power, and my question to you all is, what are we going to do with it? That's why we wanted to make the Inheriting Podcast a space where people could learn about the histories of communities different than their own, to find inspiration when the time comes to fight together. Stop AAPI Hate was co-founded when community leaders from Chinese for Affirmative Action, the AAPI Equity Alliance, and the Asian American Studies Department at San Francisco State came together to document the rise of anti-Asian racism in the early stages of the global pandemic. It was exactly the kind of coalition building that Pat championed. We stand on his shoulders and the shoulders of centuries of Asian Americans who took the harder path for the greater good. There are countless heroes unknown to history. We may not know their names, but we are living in their future. So the question is, what future are we building now?
Before my uncle passed away in 2019, one of the most significant pieces of advice he left with me was, we all have the opportunity to be a channel for change. And if each of us tries to make the world a better place around us, if each person did that, then it's true. One person can change the world. Patrick Salaver's willingness to put himself on the front lines, to risk everything, shows me that as Asian Americans, we can't just stand by silently. We have to step up. We have to build bridges, and we have to fight for a future where all our communities are thriving together. Because collective action brings collective liberation. Thank you.